budget speaker amps almost all need upgraded op amps to sound their best. So why do the companies making them not give them enough space internally for you to choose the best possible op amps that you might want to use? Well, this company and the guy behind it decided to solve that problem. Move over Fozzy Audio because somebody else is playing your game now and they might be playing it better. The 3E Audio A7 amplifier has a lot in common with an amp like the Fozzy Audio ZA3, but there's also a fair bit that's different. One such difference is that the A7 here sounds fantastic whether you're using the XLR inputs or the RCA inputs. With the ZA3, you really need to feed it via XLR to get the best possible sound. Another thing it does differently is that the A7 can operate as a power amp or as an integrated amp with a volume control. Flicking a switch on the back of the A7 will bypass the volume control and allow you to deliver the sound from a DAC with a volume control or through a preamp and just have the A7 take care of power duties only. That's what makes it a power amp. In the other switch position, the volume control on the front of the A7 becomes active and means that you can feed it directly from a DAC without volume control and then do all of your volume from here. In other words, the volume is now integrated within the amplifier, making it an integrated amp. The A7 also has a really handy auto on-off function, so it's going to switch itself off when it hasn't had signal for a while and switch itself back on when that signal returns. Or if you want to, you can use the 12-volt trigger cable. And so the A7 looks pretty good so far, but the Fozzy has a few advantages of its own. Firstly, it has a subwoofer output to pass on the signal to an external sub if you want one. The A7 doesn't have that. And secondly, the Fozzy Audio ZA3 is significantly cheaper. The ZA3 retails for somewhere around about $150 to $180 depending on where and when you look, whereas the A7 costs $250, so it's a fair bit more expensive. And that begs the question, why would you buy the A7 then? Easy. It sounds better. That's partly because it comes with better op amps installed as standard. The A7 in its standard form uses the OPA 1656 op amps as opposed to the fairly mediocre NE5532 op amps in the Fozzy. Of course, you could buy a pair of OPA 1656 op amps on the 8-pin converters and plug them into your Fozzy Audio ZA3. That's totally possible. It'll cost you around about $20 and it's a pretty easy process. That would likely bring the ZA3 to the same level as the A7 in terms of sonic performance, and you'll still have spent less money. Where the A7 further differentiates itself though, is if you want to start playing with the big boy op amps. I mean that both figuratively and literally. The best op amps on the market are options like the Burson Audio V7s, the Sparco's Labs 2590 Pro op amps, and something like the Staccato op amps. All of those are too big to comfortably fit within the ZA3 without modifications or excess pressure on the circuit board. The V7s though, fit very comfortably in the A7 amplifier. It's like it was made for them. There's plenty of space both horizontally and vertically for something like the V7s and even Sparco's 3602 op amps, the slightly lower level ones. Sadly though, that's where the big boy fun ends because you're not going to fit the Sparco's 2590s into the A7, nor can you fit the Staccato op amps. That's partly due to the height of the Staccatos, but it's also because of a couple of capacitors right next to each of the 8-pin sockets. That means you're not getting the Sparco's 2590s in there, which are flatter but wider. As I said, I did fit the lower spec Sparco's 3602s in there, but that also came with a few challenges. For some reason, the 8-pin sockets on the A7 were a little bit loose and sloppy around most of the other op amps I tried to plug in. It seems that the adapters for the OPA 1656 op amps that the A7 comes with as standard have quite chunky thick pins, and it seems to have stretched out the insides of the sockets so that everything else I tried was a little bit loose. And so my first attempt with the Sparco's 3602s just failed. My next attempt using another 8-pin adapter also failed. And then finally I found an 8-pin adapter that had flatter pins that are a bit wider, and those did work, not optimally, but they worked. And so at that point, we were set up for some comparisons. But before we talk about op amps, let's rewind and talk about how the A7 sounds just in its stock form. I'm just jumping in because I've made a boo-boo. I prepared this video thinking that the ZA3 did not take the Burson V7 Vivid style op amps or the classic style op amps too, but that's wrong. The Fozzy Audio V3 Mono is the one that won't take the V7 sized op amps from Burson Audio. The V6 version might be a bit tighter. I don't actually have a ZA3 here anymore to test it in. I've got the V3 monos. I don't have the ZA3, so I couldn't confirm. So apologies for the error. What that means for the rest of this video is that the content I'm going to tell you about the sound performance of the 3E Audio A7 amplifier is all accurate and true. It's just not necessarily as big of a differentiator from the ZA3 as I was thinking it was in my head. I didn't want to go back and re-record this whole video because it was going to delay its release even longer. It's already been a long time coming, so hopefully you can just look past the references to the ZA3 not being able to take the Burson Audio op amps. There are still differences, as I've spoken about already in this video, as to why you might choose the 3E Audio over the Fozzy Audio amps. And now that I remember that the Burson Audio op amps will fit in both, it's probably going to come down to whether or not you really want the ability to switch off the volume control perhaps and use it as a power amp. That's a vote for the A7. And also if you're going to use the RCA input, that's another vote for the A7. But if it's just coming down to pure sound quality, when you take into account the cost of the ZA3 and you add on top of it the fact that it can actually use the same Burson op amps, the Fozzy Audio is pretty solid. So you might just want to go there. I've got a full review on that one. You can check it out if you want to. So sorry for the error. Let's get back to the video. In my recent review of the amazing SMSL Raw HA1 speaker amp and not headphone amp, you'll understand that if you've seen the video, I said that I thought the HA1 and the A7 were probably pretty comparable in terms of speaker amplifier performance. It turns out I was wrong. The SMSL Raw HA1 is a clearly better amplifier in my opinion than the A7 in its stock form. In other words, assuming you don't want to play with op amps, just get the SMSL Raw HA1. Using the same DAC to feed RCA inputs into the SMSL Raw HA1 and XLR inputs into the 3E Audio A7, the HA1 delivered a crisper and more focused overall sound. On a simple track like Tearjerker, the HA1 delivered a vocal which was beautifully focused and present right in the center of the soundstage. That's all coming from the ProAct Response D2 speakers. The HA1 also delivered a wonderful sense of the ambience or the sound of the room that the recording was made in. And whilst the A7 did still sound fantastic, it didn't capture the same sense of realism that I got from the HA1. I also noticed that the sound from the A7 is just a little bit thicker overall. That leads to a sense of imaging that's just a little bit wider, and so it sounds like it's a touch smeared across the soundstage. Not badly, but it's just wider and less pinpoint. And so, if you're not going to play with op amps, switch off this video and go look at my review of the SMSL Raw HA1. I'll also link that video for you at the end so you can watch on if you want to know a bit more about the A7 before you make up your mind. I'll remind you about the HA1 later. For now though, let's talk about what the A7 can do that the HA1 can't do, and that's play with op amps. After finally getting the Sparkos Labs SS3602 op amps into the A7 and connected properly in those 8-pin sockets, the sound became a bit fuller, a bit richer, but also more detailed from the A7. I know I said just a moment ago that in its stock form, the A7 was sounding just a little bit thick, and now I've said that it got smoother and richer with the Sparkos, so let me clarify. When I said that it was a little bit thick sounding in its stock form, what I meant that it was a touch muddy and lacking in clarity compared to something like that SMSL amp. With the Sparkos Labs 3602 op amps installed, any sense of muddiness or clarity was completely gone, but the tonality of the amplifier became a little bit smoother and richer. And that's compared to both its starting point on its own, but also compared to the SMSL Raw HA1. That was my benchmark for all of this testing, and so for me it was a question of could the A7 overcome the outstanding HA1 if you want to play with op amps? And the answer is that adding op amps definitely leveled the playing field to a degree, but there's a bit more nuance that we need to talk about. The improved sense of clarity, the removal of the muddiness, but the increase in that sense of smoothness or fullness of the sound from the A7 with the 3602 op amps was also accompanied by improved imaging and focus in the sound. And so we now had better clarity, better focus to the image, and that gave us a better sense of the soundstage. And that was all combined with a slightly richer overall tonality compared to the excellent SMSL Raw HA1. And so I'd describe the sound from the A7 with the 3602s as being different from the HA1 rather than one being better or worse. You've got a very clear, focused and clean sound from the HA1 that's not clinical or sterile. Watch the full review for more descriptions. But that's more on the clean and focused side, whereas the A7 with the Sparco's op amps was a little bit fuller and richer sounding, but still beautifully focused. One thing that might sway you towards the 3E Audio A7 with those Sparco's op amps is that its sound became a little bit easier to listen to than the SMSL amp. It was just a tiny bit more relaxed in its presentation, not a sense of clarity or detail or anything like that, just that it was an easier listen whilst having all the detail. Having said that, as I went back and forth, I did still prefer the Raw HA1. Even with the 3602 op amps installed in the A7, it sounds just a tiny bit vague and less lifelike when compared to the HA1 on a track like Days. From the A7, I didn't feel like I was sitting in the audience at a Bowie concert, and so swapping to the Burson Audio V7 Vivids was the next hope. But in the opening of Days, I still didn't feel like it was a great improvement over the 3602. There was a little bit more texture in the vocals and a little bit more focus in the soundstage, but the differences were very subtle. As always, subtle differences in sound take a while to properly digest and understand, and as I spent more time with the A7 and the V7 op amps, it was clear that it was definitely the better sounding combination than with the 3602s, but all the differences were still around the margins. The music sounds just a tiny bit more lifelike with the V7 Vivids installed, and so they're the op amp that I would choose if I had the A7. I can't stress enough though that the differences are very small and both op amps move in the same general direction. The V7 Vivids just take it a little tiny bit further. But then you've also got the V7 Classics. These are a richer and warmer sounding version of the V7 op amps. So the Vivids are your bright and clean sound, but still very refined. Your Classics are your rich, warm sound. To keep things simple, the V7 Classics are not a good match for the A7. They do bring some nice texture and articulation out of sounds like guitars, but the vocals became too smooth and unfocused from the A7 for my tastes. The Classics, to be clear, can be amazing op amps in the right DACs and the right amps. This is just not one of those combinations. And so if you're in the market for a Class D amp that's going to allow you to do some op amp rolling, I think the 3E Audio A7 is a really nice choice. It's probably the best choice for those wanting to op amp roll. It's an amplifier that I think is worth considering, and I'll put links in the description down below for you to check it out for yourself. On the other hand, the SMSL Raw HA1 offers the same levels of performance as the 3E Audio A7, and that's even after you've upgraded the op amps in the A7. And so the HA1 would be my affordable speaker amp of choice, and it's also got a heap of additional features that the A7 doesn't. So watch this video here to find out all about those extra features and why the HA1 is so brilliant. For now though, thank you to YouTube channel members, thank you to channel Patreon members, and thank you to those of you who leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.